Okay, guys, today we're going to be reading two articles about corporal punishment in schools. And the first article is called Arguments for and Against the Use of Corporal Punishment in Schools. Corporal punishment in schools is an emotive and controversial topic for many people. The argument for and against mainly revolve around the ethics and practicalities of using it as a way of maintaining student discipline. People who are for corporal punishment generally take the view that provided it can be properly regulated, it can be an effective way of maintaining discipline in an educational setting, while those who are against it generally view it as an ineffective method of maintaining discipline and or unethical. The ideal behind the practice is that pain is deliberately inflicted on a student, usually by a teacher, as a punishment for an offense that has been committed. As well as serving as a punishment, the punishment is also intended to act as a deterrent against future rule breaking. Typically, the punishment is performed by striking the pupil repeatedly with some sort of implement, such as hitting the palm of their hand with a ruler. Paddling is a common way of administering corporal punishment in the USA. Corporal punishment in schools is prohibited in over 30 countries globally, including Canada, Kenya, South Africa, New Zealand, and most of Europe. The United States tends to be split along north-south lines as far as allowing it is concerned, with northern states generally prohibiting the practice and southern states generally allowing it. In answer to the question, should corporal punishment in schools be allowed, here are the main arguments for and against that people use. So the four arguments for is number one, because it works. That is why it has featured as a traditional tools of teachers for so long. There is no other equivalent that acts as both a punishment and deterrent in the same way. The psychological and physical immediacy of a short, sharp shock is simply the most effective way to affect behavior in some circumstances. Number two, as long as it is properly regulated, there should be no problem with it being used in schools. Some of the negative stories used by people opposed to corporal punishment are the result of failures in regulation and leadership, not corporal punishment itself. Number three, it can be administered quickly. The pupil can then continue with his or her learning, unlike other forms of punishment, such as suspension from school when they miss school time and their education is damaged. And number four, it is also an effective use of staff time, unlike other forms of punishment such as detentions, when hours of staff time can be wasted supervising students who have misbehaved. There are three arguments against. It is a form of abuse against children, psychologically as well as physically. It also sends the message that violence is socially acceptable, which is entirely the wrong message to be given out. Number two, there is no evidence that schools who use it are any more disciplined or orderly than those that don't. If anything, the effects of it seem to be more negative than positive and serve to undermine the teacher-pupil relationship. Number three, where it's being used, there is evidence that corporal punishment is not used in an even-handed way. For instance, statistically speaking, boys tend to be given the punishment more than girls, and African Americans seem to be given the punishment more than white school children for similar offenses. Number four, physical discipline fixes a behavioral problem in the short term, but can cause psychological harm or make the child more aggressive in the longer term, according to many child psychologists. Building a trusting relationship and building good discipline takes time and energy, but is worth it in the long run. School corporal punishment in the U.S. The legality of corporal punishment is decided at a state level in the USA, and so laws vary in different parts of the country. Number one, currently the practice is banned in public schools in 31 states, plus the District of Columbia. Number two, New Jersey and Iowa also ban the practice in private schools too. Number three, New Jersey was the first U.S. state to abolish school corporal punishment in 1867. Number four, corporal punishment is most often used in the South, mainly in public schools in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas. Now, we are going to read another article that talks about where corporal punishment is still used in school. Its roots run deep. Robinsonville High School sits in a small gap in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. Green slopes dotted with cattle hug in around the school before they rise into a thick cover of pine trees. David Matheson is the principal here, and he's the only high school principal in the state who still performs corporal punishment. At Robinsonville, corporal punishment takes the form of paddling. A few licks on the backside, Matheson delivers with a long wooden paddle. North Carolina state law describes corporal punishment as the intentional infliction of physical pain upon the body of a student as a disciplinary measure. Robinsonville High School's policy allows students to request a paddling in place of an in-school suspension, or ISS. Last year, 22 students chose it. Most kids will tell you that they choose the paddling so they don't miss class, Matheson says. One of these students is Allison Collins. She's a senior now and says she chose to be paddled her sophomore year after her phone went off in class. She described it as my first time ever being in trouble. Collins went to the assistant principal's office where she was told she had a day of in-school suspension. Collins told Principal Matheson that she'd rather take a paddling, and so he called her father to get permission. And my dad was like, just paddle her, she says, because down here in the mountains we do it the old school way. That's the policy here. Principal Matheson paddles a student only if he gets permission from their parent, and he says very few parents opt out. Matheson's grew up here and went to school with a lot of his students' parents. It's something that the family decides, he adds. Nationwide, it's not unusual for parents to support the use of corporal punishment as a form of discipline. Recent surveys show about 75% of Americans believe it's sometimes necessary to spank a child. I think it goes back to traditional values, said Cherry Lynn, a Robinsonville parent who substitutes as a band teacher and coaches the school's shooting team. A lot of parents still hold to the traditional value of corporal punishment. They use it at home, and so the school is an extension of home. In a classroom down the hall, Bo Cronlin, a student teacher, says he doesn't know the school used corporal punishment until he sent one of his freshmen to the office for talking. Kids talk, he says. I don't think they should get spanked for it or paddled. Tom Vitagallone of the child advocacy group NC Child says for years he's been sending school leaders research papers showing corporal punishment leads to bad outcomes for students. Higher dropout rates, increased rates of depression and substance abuse, and increased violent episodes down the road. Principal Matheson said he's seen that research, but he still believes paddling is an effective form of discipline. I think if more schools did it, we'd have a whole lot better society. I do believe that. Vitagallone takes issue with that. When it gets to schools, we now have an agent of the state hitting a child, he says, and we don't believe that should happen. When he started this work more than 30 years ago, thousands of children in North Carolina were struck each year. Now Robinsonville High is one of just a few schools that still use it. The latest numbers show about 70 students were paddled in the state last year. A recent investigation by Education Week shows that in the 2013-2014 school year, about 110,000 students were physically punished nationwide. That's in part because in some states, including Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and Texas, tens of thousands of students are paddled every year. Child advocates are working towards zero paddling in North Carolina. They're asking state legislators to outlaw the practice in schools for good. That's happening nationwide too. As NPR Ed reported in December, dozens of groups, including the National PTA, Children's Defense Fund, and American Academy of Pediatrics, signed a letter of their own supporting an end to corporal punishment. Okay, so we've now read a couple of articles about corporal punishment and some reasons for and against. And Ms. Burke and Ms. Schumann will tell you what you're going to do now. There's going to be a writing assignment, so make sure you complete this, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact your teacher. Thank you.